The palace walls have always held secrets, but some moments pierce through the silence and make their way to the public in the form of shockwaves. Imagine walking through the grand corridors of Buckingham Palace, where portraits of kings and queens hang heavy with history, and suddenly a storm erupts within those gilded rooms. This was not the kind of storm that rattled the windows or shook the chandeliers. It was the kind of storm that tore through the heart of a family and threatened the stability of the monarchy itself. The question that hangs in the air is this: what happens when a prince, already estranged and bruised by past battles, dares to demand titles for his children, and his father, the reigning king, says no? This is not just a story of royal politics. It is the unraveling of bonds, the clashing of duty with desire, and the moment when love for one's children collides with loyalty to an institution older than memory. For years, the narrative of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle has been one of conflict, of choosing independence over tradition, of carving out their own space in a world that rarely forgives those who defy the crown. Their departure from royal duties, what the world has come to call Megxit, was a seismic event. It divided opinion globally. Some saw it as bravery, a couple breaking free from a suffocating system, while others viewed it as betrayal, a selfish act of abandoning responsibility. But beneath that decision lay unresolved tension, questions left hanging, and an ache that no interview, no documentary, no carefully worded statement could soothe. Titles, seemingly ceremonial to the outside world, became a battleground of identity, legitimacy, and recognition. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, the children of Harry and Meghan, were caught in the eye of that storm before they were even old enough to understand what a crown meant. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This is the stage upon which Harry made his bold move. He returned to the palace with a demand, some say it was a plea, that his children be granted titles that would secure their place in the royal lineage. To the ordinary eye, it might appear to be about status or privilege, but to Harry, it was something deeper, a desperate attempt to give his children what he felt he had lost, a way of securing them against the criticism and suspicion that shadowed his own life. Every child of the monarchy carries the weight of a surname that is also a symbol, but Archie and Lilibet's names carried controversy before they even had a chance to speak their first words. Harry's request was not just about titles. It was about legitimacy, about recognition from the family he felt had abandoned him. But King Charles is not just a father. He is the head of the monarchy, a man whose every decision carries the weight of centuries. And as history has shown, the crown does not bend easily, even for blood. When Harry approached Charles, hoping for agreement, what he met instead was the unyielding wall of tradition. Charles, by all accounts, listened with patience, but his answer was firm. No new titles would be granted, not now, not under these circumstances. The refusal was more than denial. It was a rejection that carried symbolism far beyond the immediate moment. It was a reminder that the monarchy cannot be dictated by personal desire, that even a king's son must bow to the rules that bind the crown. The moment of confrontation between father and son was not just a conversation, it was an earthquake. Sources close to the palace describe it as tense, emotional, and raw. Harry, who had already carried years of resentment, felt the sting of betrayal once again. And Charles, though a father at heart, was forced to wear the mantle of king, making a decision that would break his son's heart but preserve the institution he had sworn to protect. This was the collision point, the moment when family ties snapped under the weight of royal duty. And the fallout, as we will see, would not only shake Harry and Meghan but send tremors across the monarchy and the public alike. The emotional core of this story lies in the middle ground, between what Harry believed was right for his children and what Charles knew was necessary for the monarchy. Imagine the anguish of a father fighting for recognition for his children, facing the cold refusal of his own father. It is a universal theme, stripped of crowns and palaces, a son seeking validation, a father upholding principles, and a family breaking under the strain. Yet in the world of royalty, these private battles are magnified, dissected, and immortalized by history. The halls of Buckingham Palace have seen wars, abdications, scandals, and betrayals. But rarely has the conflict felt so deeply personal, so visibly human, as the sight of a father and son standing on opposite sides of an invisible line that neither could cross without losing something precious. For those watching from the outside, the scene played like a theater of tragedy. Harry, already cast as the rebel prince, seemed to cement his role as the outcast, the one who challenged the crown and paid the price. Charles, meanwhile, stepped further into the role of king, showing that his loyalty to the monarchy outweighed even the deepest instincts of a father's love. But what does it mean when a father removes his son from the palace? Not with the harshness of a tyrant, but with the solemn weight of a king making an impossible choice. It means that the monarchy is once again at war with itself, and the world is watching every detail unfold. The introduction of this story is not meant to provide answers. It is meant to pull you into the heart of the storm, to make you feel the weight of the confrontation, and to leave you asking the same questions that echo through the palace halls. Was Harry right to fight for his children's titles? Was Charles right to deny him? And at what cost does a crown preserve itself when it means breaking the very family it is built upon? These are the questions that will guide us through the chapters ahead, where every detail, every whispered conversation, and every public reaction reveals the depth of this crisis. This is not just a tale of titles. It is a story of love, power, betrayal, and the eternal conflict between family and crown. And so, as we stand at the edge of this story, remember that the truth of what happened is not found only in the headlines or the statements released by palace officials. It is found in the silences, the looks exchanged, the doors closed to the public. It is found in the tear-stained arguments and the cold firmness of royal tradition. And as we move forward, we will peel back the layers of this conflict, chapter by chapter, until the full weight of this confrontation stands revealed. This was the moment when Prince Harry tried to secure a future for his children, and King Charles reminded him that the future of the monarchy comes at a price. This is just the beginning of the journey, and the palace walls are only starting to whisper their secrets. The confrontation between Harry and Charles did not happen in a vacuum. To understand the full weight of this moment, one must trace the years of tension that brought them here. Since childhood, Harry has lived under the shadow of royal expectation and tragedy. The death of his mother, Princess Diana, carved wounds that never truly healed. Growing up, he often felt overshadowed by his brother, Prince William, the heir to the throne. The difference between heir and spare may sound like a technicality, but in the royal family, it is everything. It dictates how the public sees you, how the palace treats you, and even how you are valued within the system. For Harry, that distinction became a source of pain that grew more pronounced over time. His bond with his mother was one of warmth and rebellion, and when she was gone, he was left with an institution that seemed cold and unyielding. That pain shaped him, made him fiercely protective of his own children, and perhaps explains why he was so determined that Archie and Lilibet not inherit the same feelings of exclusion he endured. When Meghan entered Harry's life, she represented something different from the rigidity of royal life. She was independent, outspoken, and unafraid to challenge traditions. At first, their union was celebrated as a breath of fresh air in the monarchy. But soon, Meghan's presence became polarizing. The tabloids tore her apart, the palace distanced itself, and what might have been a unifying story turned into a saga of division. Harry, already sensitive to the scars of the past, saw in Meghan and his children the chance to rewrite history, to protect them from the cruelty that had once consumed his own childhood. His fight for their titles was not merely symbolic. It was, in his eyes, a shield against erasure. Without titles, he feared, Archie and Lilibet would forever remain on the margins, denied the recognition that others in the royal bloodline received without question. Yet King Charles saw things differently. As monarch, he had sworn to preserve the balance between modernity and tradition, a task that demanded difficult decisions. He understood that granting titles under pressure could open a door that would weaken the monarchy's structure. He was also aware of the optics. Harry and Meghan had publicly criticized the royal family, stepped away from duties, and built careers outside the crown. How would the public perceive it if Charles rewarded them with more recognition? The institution could not afford to look weak or inconsistent. So, for Charles, this was not just about Archie and Lilibet. It was about the survival of the monarchy itself. To him, titles were not bargaining chips for reconciliation, but symbols that had to be guarded carefully. The actual moment when Harry raised his demand has been described by those close to the palace as tense beyond measure. It was not a casual conversation over tea. It was direct, emotional, and unrelenting. Harry's words carried the weight of years of frustration, and Charles's reply carried the burden of centuries of tradition. At one point, the air in the room grew so heavy that silence itself seemed to suffocate. The staff who later heard whispers of what transpired spoke of Harry's fiery tone, of Charles maintaining his composure, and of an atmosphere that felt more like a battlefield than a family meeting. The palace may often project calmness, but behind those doors, voices were raised, hearts were wounded, and decisions were carved into stone. For Harry, being told no was not just rejection, it was humiliation. It reopened every scar he had carried from feeling secondary, overlooked, or disposable within his own family. In his mind, he was not just fighting for a name or a title. He was fighting to ensure his children would never feel the way he once did. The refusal struck him like betrayal, deepening the divide between himself and the crown. For Charles, however, the refusal was duty. He could not bend the crown's authority to a son's personal plea without undermining the very foundation upon which his reign stood. And so, two men who shared blood stood as strangers, each convinced he was doing what was right. The clash escalated until Charles, in a moment that history may remember as symbolic of the monarchy's rigidity, told Harry to leave the palace. Some insiders claim the king's words were delivered with measured calm, while others say the frustration finally cracked through his royal composure. Either way, the result was the same. Harry was removed, not as a son, but as a man who had crossed a line the crown could not allow. That removal was more than physical. It was the crystallization of the divide, the point of no return. To be told to leave the palace is to be told you no longer belong, not only in a building but within the very heart of the institution itself. In the days that followed, whispers turned into headlines. The press pieced together fragments of the confrontation, some exaggerated, others hushed. The public was left to wonder, was Harry justified in his demands? Was Charles justified in his refusal? The answers depended on perspective, but what was undeniable was the raw humanity of the moment. Strip away the crowns, the jewels, and the centuries of tradition, and you have a father and son torn apart by conflicting visions of loyalty. One man fought for his children's place in the world. The other fought for the crown's survival. In between, the family itself fractured a little more. What makes this story so gripping is not only the personal conflict, but the way it reflects a larger truth about power, legacy, and identity. The monarchy, for all its pomp and ritual, is built on people. People who laugh, cry, argue, and break. The image presented to the world is one of stability and control, but the reality is far more fragile. When Harry stood before Charles, he was not just a prince demanding titles. He was a son pleading for recognition, a father protecting his children, and a man defying an institution that had shaped his life in ways both glorious and cruel. And when Charles said no, he was not just a father denying his son. He was a king drawing a line in the sand, a custodian of history who knew that yielding could mean unraveling. The introduction ends not with answers, but with questions that linger like smoke after a fire. What does it mean to be royal in an age where titles can be both shields and burdens? How much should tradition dictate the lives of individuals born into it? And at what cost does a crown preserve itself when the price is the love and unity of a family? These questions are not just for Harry or Charles. They are for us, the audience, to wrestle with as we journey deeper into this story. Because in the end, this is more than a royal drama. It is the timeless story of family versus duty, love versus tradition, and the human cost of power. The rupture between Prince Harry and the royal family cannot be fully understood without revisiting the event that redefined his place within the monarchy, Megxit. The decision by Harry and Meghan to step back from their royal duties was more than a family disagreement. It was a cultural earthquake. It was a moment when tradition collided with modern independence, when centuries of duty faced the raw reality of personal choice. To grasp why the confrontation over Archie and Lilibet's titles became so explosive, one must understand the deep shadows cast by that departure. It was not just about leaving the palace. It was about leaving behind expectations, obligations, and a legacy that had shaped every moment of Harry's life. When Harry and Meghan first announced their decision in early 2020, the world reacted with disbelief. Here was a royal prince, born into a life most people could only imagine, choosing to walk away. But to Harry, the gilded cage was suffocating. He had long struggled with the intrusive gaze of the press, the constant comparison to William, and the lingering wounds of Diana's tragic death. Meghan's arrival in his life gave him the courage to break free. Together, they envisioned a life where they could be financially independent, free from the suffocating rules of the firm, and able to raise their children without the scrutiny that had once destroyed Harry's mother. It was a dream that many applauded, but for the monarchy, it was betrayal wrapped in rebellion. Behind closed doors, Megxit was not a neat, clean departure. It was a war of negotiations, accusations, and ultimatums. Harry and Meghan wanted a hybrid model, half in, half out. They sought the freedom to pursue commercial ventures while maintaining royal privileges. The palace, however, could not allow such a precedent. To them, you were either in or out. There could be no halfway. And so, the Sussexes were stripped of their royal patronages, Harry lost his military honors, and their roles within the royal structure were severed. It was a painful cut, one that left wounds on both sides. Harry felt humiliated, Meghan felt targeted, and Charles, then still Prince of Wales, watched as the family narrative spun further out of control. This history matters because it shaped the atmosphere in which the demand for Archie and Lilibet's titles would later take place. The memory of Megxit lingered like smoke after a fire, its bitterness seeping into every conversation, every attempt at reconciliation. For the palace, Harry and Meghan had forfeited their right to the privileges of royalty. For Harry, stepping away did not mean his children should be punished or denied recognition. To him, the sins of the father should not be visited upon the son or daughter. But to the monarchy, everything was interconnected. The choices Harry and Meghan made carried consequences that extended to their children. This clash of perspectives would become the very heart of the conflict. It is worth remembering how the public saw Megxit. On one side, there was sympathy. Many people around the world admired Harry and Meghan for prioritizing mental health, family, and freedom over ceremonial duty. They were seen as modern rebels, carving out a space for love and independence in a system that often crushed individuality. On the other side, critics accused them of hypocrisy. They claimed to want privacy, yet gave interviews to Oprah, Netflix, and international media. They stepped back from royal life, but still used their titles and connections to secure deals worth millions. The contradictions made them both beloved and resented, heroes to some and villains to others. This polarization did not disappear. It resurfaced with even more intensity when the subject of Archie and Lilibet's titles emerged. Inside the palace, Megxit had lasting consequences. William was left carrying the weight of responsibility alone, deepening the gulf between brothers. Queen Elizabeth, then still alive, reportedly felt hurt but pragmatic. Charles, however, bore the heaviest burden. As the future king, he knew that every fracture in the family weakened the monarchy itself. And yet, as a father, he grieved the loss of his son's loyalty and presence. The complexity of his emotions meant that by the time Harry returned with requests for his children, the king's patience was already stretched thin. Megxit had not only changed Harry's life, it had altered the monarchy's perception of him permanently. For Harry, the shadow of Megxit became both a shield and a weapon. It was a shield because he could claim that the monarchy had never supported him, that stepping away was an act of survival. But it was also a weapon because he used it to challenge the system, to remind the world that even those born into privilege could suffer deeply under its weight. Every interview he gave, every revelation in his memoir, every documentary appearance was laced with the aftermath of that decision. And when he stood before his father asking for Archie and Lilibet's titles, he carried all of that history with him. It was not a fresh request. It was one born from years of bruises and resentment. The monarchy, however, does not deal in feelings. It deals in images, precedents, and tradition. Megxit had set a precedent that Charles could not afford to reverse. If Harry and Meghan were given the privileges of the institution despite rejecting its duties, what message would that send to the rest of the family, or to the public? Charles knew that the crown must appear consistent, even if it meant being cold. The refusal to grant new titles to Archie and Lilibet was, in many ways, an extension of the decision made during Megxit. It was a continuation of the line drawn then. If you step away, you cannot take the crown. But for Harry, Megxit was not the end of his story. He believed it was a new beginning. He thought he could redefine what it meant to be royal, to craft a modern model of monarchy that balanced tradition with independence. In his mind, the institution could evolve, just as society had evolved. But in that belief lay the greatest misunderstanding between himself and his father. To Charles, the monarchy is not meant to bend with the wind. It is meant to withstand it. And so, every time Harry attempted to rewrite the rules, he found himself colliding with the immovable stone of tradition. As we look at this first chapter, we see how Megxit cast a shadow over everything that followed. It was the moment that shifted Harry from being an insider to an outsider, from a prince of the palace to a prince of exile. That identity, once shaped, could not be undone easily. And when the demand for titles came, it was seen not as a father's wish, but as the continuation of a battle that began years earlier. Megxit was the first crack in the wall. The confrontation with Charles was the moment that crack threatened to become a collapse. This chapter ends where the next begins, with Harry standing at the intersection of his past and his children's future. He was a man still haunted by the wounds of his departure, still searching for validation, and still willing to challenge the system that had defined his entire existence. But as the story unfolds, we will see that the shadow of Megxit was not only long, it was inescapable. It followed Harry into every room of the palace, whispered through every conversation, and ultimately, it set the stage for the most dramatic confrontation of his life. The years leading up to Megxit were filled with signs of discontent that the palace either could not see or chose to ignore. Harry had long spoken about his struggles with the press, the relentless attention, and the lack of protection he felt from the institution. After Meghan entered his life, the tension reached a breaking point. She was not just another royal spouse. She was an outsider who brought her own identity, career, and voice into a family that thrived on silence, obedience, and carefully curated appearances. Harry found in her the courage to take the steps he had always thought about, but never acted on. Stepping away from the royal family became not just a possibility, but a necessity for his survival. In January 2020, the announcement hit like a thunderclap. Harry and Meghan declared that they would step back as senior royals. The words were carefully chosen, but the implications were explosive. It was a declaration that they would no longer be bound by the strict protocols of royal life. For the monarchy, it was betrayal in broad daylight. The institution that had endured abdications, divorces, and scandals now faced a challenge from within its own house, one that questioned not only the structure of the monarchy, but its relevance in a modern world. The negotiations that followed were grueling. Harry and Meghan wanted financial independence, but also wanted to retain certain privileges and duties. They proposed a hybrid model, part royal, part independent. The palace was adamant that this was not possible. The monarchy functions on absolutes. You are either part of it fully, or you are not part of it at all. There was no precedent for the kind of arrangement Harry and Meghan were asking for, and the Queen, Charles, and William stood united in saying no. The result was a painful break. Harry lost his honorary military titles, something that struck at his very identity as a veteran and serviceman. Meghan lost her patronages. Together, they lost the standing that had once placed them at the heart of the royal family. The world watched as the Sussexes settled in North America, first in Canada and then in California. For many, this seemed like the fairy tale ending they had fought for: freedom from the palace, a chance to live life on their own terms. But freedom came with its own challenges. They faced financial pressures, the need to build a brand, and the continuing storm of media scrutiny. Their every move was dissected. Were they thriving, or were they floundering? Critics claimed they wanted the perks without the responsibility. Supporters argued they were brave for refusing to be suffocated by an archaic institution. The memory of Megxit lingered heavily in Buckingham Palace. For Charles, who had spent decades preparing for kingship, The episode was more than a personal disappointment. It was a warning sign. It showed that the family's unity could not be taken for granted, that even a son could break away and challenge the authority of the crown. The queen, who had spent her reign embodying stability, reportedly felt both sorrow and resolve. She knew the monarchy must endure above all else. That perspective hardened the family's response when Harry returned with requests later on. But for Harry, Megxit was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. He believed he was blazing a trail that would modernize what it meant to be royal. He believed the monarchy had to adapt to survive, and that he and Meghan could be the ones to show it how. Instead, what he found was resistance at every level. His departure did not spark reform in the palace. It reinforced the institution's rigidity. Where he saw opportunity for evolution, they saw threat of dissolution. This gap in understanding only deepened the bitterness between him and his family. When Harry looked at his children, Archie and Lilibet, he saw the future he wanted to create. One where they could live freely, unbound by the cruelty of the tabloids, yet still recognized for their heritage. He wanted them to inherit not just a name, but the legitimacy that came with titles. The irony was that Megxit itself had made this far more complicated. By stepping away, Harry had placed his children outside the circle of expectation. The monarchy could not easily grant them what Harry now demanded, because to do so would undermine the very boundaries drawn during Megxit. The choices of the past came back to shape the conflicts of the present. The media narrative surrounding Megxit only intensified the bitterness. Headlines screamed of betrayal, selfishness, and greed. Others praised the Sussexes for their courage. Documentaries, podcasts, and interviews painted the picture of a family at war with itself. Harry's words in interviews, about feeling trapped, about Meghan facing racism, about the lack of support for his mental health, added fuel to the fire. Every revelation widened the gulf between him and the crown. For the public, it became a story of sides. Were you with Harry and Meghan, or with the monarchy? That polarization never truly faded. It resurfaced each time Harry and Meghan made a move that clashed with tradition. For Charles, Megxit created a constant headache. He was caught between being a father and being the guardian of an institution. The two roles often pulled him in opposite directions. He wanted peace with his son, but he could not allow the monarchy to appear weak. He wanted to protect his grandchildren, but he could not give the impression that privilege could be demanded. This duality defined his approach to Harry's later confrontation. It was not simply about Archie and Lilibet. It was about whether the monarchy could withstand the pressure Harry continued to apply from the outside. The significance of Megxit in this story is not merely historical. It is the root of the distrust that colored every conversation afterward. It is why Charles's refusal of Harry's request felt inevitable. It is why the confrontation carried so much emotional weight. Harry did not walk into that room as just a father asking for recognition for his children. He walked in as the prince who had once walked away, who had defied the crown, who had exposed its secrets to the world. The palace never forgot that. And so, when Harry raised his demand, he was not starting fresh. He was reopening old wounds. And Charles responded with the same firmness that had defined the monarchy's approach from the start. As this chapter closes, it is clear that Megxit was not an isolated event. It was the beginning of a shadow that stretched across every decision that followed. Harry thought leaving would give him freedom, but in many ways, it bound him even more tightly to the conflict. He became the outsider, the rebel, the one who challenged tradition. Charles, meanwhile, became the embodiment of the crown's refusal to bend. Their paths, once father and son, became symbols of two irreconcilable visions, one for freedom, one for preservation. And as Harry's children grew, those visions collided with even greater force, setting the stage for the storm that would soon erupt within the palace walls. The monarchy has always been about lineage, inheritance, and the continuation of legacy. Titles are not just ceremonial. They are signifiers of place in the royal hierarchy, symbols that distinguish one branch of the family tree from another. From the outside, it may appear like formality, like outdated labels clinging to relevance in the modern age. But within the palace walls, titles shape everything: status, security, duty, and even the way history will remember you. For Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, Their place in the monarchy has been a point of contention since the day they were born. Their very existence brought with it a storm of questions. Would they be given titles? And if not, what message would that send to the world? Traditionally, the rules governing titles trace back to the letters patent issued by King George V in 1917. These documents set out who would be entitled to be called prince or princess. By those standards, Archie and Lilibet, as the grandchildren of the reigning monarch once Charles ascended the throne, were technically eligible. But tradition does not exist in a vacuum. It is subject to interpretation, timing, and the personal decisions of the monarch. When Archie was born in 2019, the Sussexes initially expressed that they did not want him to carry a title, citing their wish to give him as normal a life as possible. The palace echoed this sentiment publicly, but behind closed doors, the decision was more complex. Some argued it was about modernizing the monarchy, slimming down the number of working royals. Others whispered that it was about avoiding the optics of giving Harry and Meghan's child too prominent a role when the couple themselves were so controversial. The choice not to give Archie a title at birth immediately became fodder for public debate. Meghan later revealed in interviews that the palace's decision was not theirs alone, that they had been denied the choice, and that race played a role in the conversations surrounding their son. Those allegations added fuel to a fire that had been burning since Meghan joined the royal family. Questions of tradition, fairness, and prejudice merged into one volatile mix. To Harry, the denial of a title for Archie was a rejection of his child's place in the family. To the monarchy, it was a practical decision in line with a future vision of a slimmed-down crown. But the emotional consequences were unavoidable. When Lilibet Diana was born in 2021, the issue resurfaced. Her very name, chosen in honor of the Queen's childhood nickname and Diana's memory, was a symbolic olive branch. Yet the same questions followed. Would she be recognized formally as a princess when Charles became king? In theory, yes. In practice, it was uncertain. The monarchy was cautious, aware that public opinion was already sharply divided. Granting or denying titles would send a message not only to Harry and Meghan, but to the world. For Charles, this was a delicate balancing act. He had long championed a slimmed-down monarchy, one that would focus on the immediate line of succession. To him, titles had to be reserved for those who would serve the institution directly. But how does a father deny recognition to his own grandchildren without appearing cold, even cruel? That was the dilemma Charles faced as Harry raised his demands. The public's fascination with Archie and Lilibet's status reveals just how deeply titles matter, even in the 21st century. These children, innocent and unaware, became symbols in a much larger struggle. For supporters of Harry and Meghan, the withholding of titles was proof of unfair treatment, even prejudice. For defenders of the monarchy, it was common sense. Why bestow royal privileges on children who would grow up outside the system? Every photograph of Archie, every rare glimpse of Lilibet, became loaded with meaning. Were they royals in exile, or simply children living freely in California? The ambiguity itself was a source of tension. Harry's determination to secure titles for his children must be understood against this backdrop. He was not only thinking of their immediate future, but their long-term place in history. Titles, in his mind, would grant them legitimacy, shield them from the criticism that had plagued him, and ensure they would not be erased from the royal narrative. He saw them as a form of protection, a guarantee that his children would not be treated as outsiders simply because of the choices he and Meghan had made. For Harry, denying Archie and Lilibet their titles was akin to punishing them for decisions they had no part in. It was repeating the same mistakes that had haunted his own childhood, where he often felt like the spare, the less important son. The monarchy, however, saw it differently. Titles were not shields, but obligations. They came with scrutiny, expectations, and responsibilities. Granting Archie and Lilibet titles would not exempt them from public pressure, it would invite it. The very protection Harry sought could be undermined by the visibility titles brought. Beyond that, the institution had to think of precedent. If Harry's children received titles despite his departure from royal duties, what message would that send about accountability? To the monarchy, this was not about punishing children. It was about preserving the integrity of the crown. The tension between these two perspectives created an impasse. Harry, driven by emotion, saw titles as love, recognition, and protection. Charles, bound by duty, saw them as symbols of service, tradition, and accountability. Neither man was entirely wrong, yet neither could concede without betraying what he valued most. That is why the confrontation over Archie and Lilibet's titles was so charged. It was not just about words before their names. It was about the clash between two visions of what it means to be royal. What makes this debate so gripping is how it resonates with ordinary people. Strip away the crowns and palaces, and you are left with a universal theme. A father wanting the best for his children, and a parent-turned-leader making decisions that affect family ties. The tension between love and duty is something many can relate to, even if most will never face it on such a global stage. For Harry, this was a personal fight that became political. For Charles, it was a political decision that became painfully personal. And in the middle stood two children, Archie and Lilibet, too young to understand the storm swirling around their names. As this chapter unfolds, we see how the place of children in the monarchy has always been fraught with complexity. From Edward VIII's abdication altering the fates of his nieces and nephews, to Diana's insistence on raising William and Harry with a semblance of normality, the history of royal children is filled with lessons about the tension between tradition and humanity. Archie and Lilibet's situation is not unique in its difficulty. It is unique in its visibility. Never before has the debate been so public, so polarized, and so entangled with issues of race, modernity, and the future of the monarchy itself. This chapter closes with the realization that the question of titles is not merely administrative. It is existential. For Harry, it is about his children's identity. For Charles, it is about the crown's survival. And as we move to the next chapter, Harry's determination becomes clearer, his resolve sharper. He is not simply asking, he is demanding. And with each demand, the fault lines within the monarchy deepen, pushing father and son closer to the point of no return. From the moment Archie Harrison was born in May 2019, questions about his status within the monarchy overshadowed the joy of his arrival. The royal family, steeped in tradition, usually follows well-trodden paths when it comes to births, christenings, and titles. But Archie's entrance into the world signaled something different. Instead of being wrapped seamlessly into the embrace of royal customs, his life became a debate about rules, reforms, and rejection. He was born into a family that lives by protocol, yet the very first headlines about him revolved not around celebration, but about whether he would be a prince. This uncertainty exposed just how much weight titles carry in the British monarchy. They are not merely names, but markers of identity, status, and legitimacy. To the monarchy, they define the hierarchy that has endured for centuries. To the public, they carry fascination and meaning, connecting individuals to history itself. And to Harry, they meant everything, because he knew what it was like to live without the kind of recognition that his brother, William, enjoyed. For Harry, who had grown up as the spare, titles were not about vanity. They were about security, validation, and belonging. Archie's lack of title at birth was initially explained as part of a broader move toward modernization. Palace insiders spoke of Charles's long-held plan for a slimmed-down monarchy, one that would focus resources and attention on the direct line of succession. By this reasoning, Archie and, later, Lilibet would not need titles since they were unlikely to serve as working royals. But beneath this explanation, a more painful narrative emerged. Meghan later revealed in interviews that the decision had not been theirs alone, and that conversations within the palace included concerns about the color of Archie's skin and how different he might look. Those revelations sent shockwaves across the globe. Suddenly, the debate over titles was no longer about tradition. It was about race, representation, and fairness. Lilibet's birth in 2021 brought the issue roaring back. Named after the Queen's childhood nickname and Diana's legacy, her name itself was a gesture of connection, even reconciliation. Yet once again, the question of titles loomed. By law, with Charles on the throne, she and Archie would automatically become prince and princess. But Charles, as king, retained the power to issue new letters patent that could either confirm or restrict those titles. To Harry and Meghan, it felt like their children's identities were being held hostage to palace politics. To Charles, it was about ensuring the monarchy did not expand beyond its ability to remain relevant. The weight of this debate cannot be overstated. For Harry, titles for Archie and Lilibet symbolized protection. He believed that without formal recognition, his children would always be treated as outsiders, marginalized both by the palace and by the public. It was not just about honorifics. It was about ensuring that his children would not suffer the same emotional wounds he had carried since childhood. He remembered what it was like to be the secondary son, constantly compared to William, and he refused to let Archie and Lilibet grow up feeling like afterthoughts. To him, the crown owed his children the dignity of acknowledgement. But Charles's perspective was grounded in centuries of royal logic. Titles are not simply gifts, they are commitments. They bring attention, obligation, and scrutiny. To grant them to children who were being raised thousands of miles away, outside the traditions of palace life, was to invite contradictions. Could they be princes and princesses in name, but not in service? Could they enjoy the prestige without the responsibilities? To Charles, that was a dangerous precedent. It blurred the lines between royal duty and private choice, weakening the monarchy's credibility. This clash between Harry and Charles reflects a deeper struggle over the future of the monarchy itself. Should it adapt to changing times, becoming more inclusive and flexible, or should it remain rigid, preserving the same rules that have held it together for generations? Archie and Lilibet's place in the royal family became the battlefield for this struggle. Their innocence only heightened the stakes. Here were two children, too young to understand the burden of history, yet already symbols of division. The public, too, played its part in shaping the narrative. Supporters of Harry and Meghan saw the denial of titles as proof of bias, a deliberate attempt to exclude them and their children. Critics accused Harry of hypocrisy. Having rejected royal duties himself, why should he expect privileges for his offspring? Social media lit up with debates that mirrored the larger cultural tensions of the age: race, privilege, tradition, and modernity. Every photograph of Archie, every rare glimpse of Lilibet, became more than just family snapshots. They were politicized images, analyzed for what they said about the family's future and the institution's soul. History offers many parallels. Royal children have always been pawns in the larger game of power and perception. The Duke of Windsor's descendants lost their place in line after his abdication. Princess Margaret's children lived lives largely outside the spotlight because of their position in the hierarchy. Even within Harry's own life, Diana fought to ensure that William and Harry were not consumed entirely by palace traditions, taking them to fast food restaurants, amusement parks, and charity visits. The question of how much the crown controls the lives of children has always been central. Archie and Lilibet's struggle is simply the latest, but perhaps the most visible, in this centuries-old dilemma. For Harry, though, this was not history, it was personal. Each time he saw his children left off official palace communications or excluded from discussions about the royal future, it deepened his resentment. To him, the monarchy was repeating the same mistakes it had made with him, diminishing his worth, overlooking his humanity, and leaving him to grapple with feelings of inadequacy. His determination to secure titles for Archie and Lilibet was less about royal protocol than about breaking that cycle. He wanted to ensure his children would never look back and wonder why they were denied acknowledgement. But Charles, facing the weight of kingship, could not allow sentiment to override duty. He understood that every decision he made would set a precedent, shaping how future generations viewed the monarchy. Granting titles to children raised abroad, with parents critical of the institution, could weaken the crown's authority. His refusal, though painful, was rooted in the belief that the monarchy must endure beyond personal grievances. And so, what Harry saw as recognition, Charles saw as risk. This chapter reveals the depth of the clash. Two men, both fathers, both shaped by the same institution, yet standing on opposite sides of its meaning. To Harry, titles were protection. To Charles, they were burden. The result was inevitable tension, a confrontation where love and duty could not coexist peacefully. Archie and Lilibet, though innocent, became symbols of this rift, their names carrying the weight of centuries-old debates about monarchy, identity, and belonging. As the chapter closes, we are left with a haunting truth. The place of children in the monarchy has always been fragile, shaped not by their own choices but by the politics of adults. Archie and Lilibet, though born into privilege, find themselves at the heart of a storm that questions the very purpose of titles in the modern age. And with each passing moment, Harry's determination to fight for their recognition only grows stronger, setting the stage for the heated confrontation that will soon erupt between him and his father. When a man feels the weight of his own childhood pressing down on him, it is often his children who become the reason he chooses to fight back. For Prince Harry, this was not abstract, it was visceral. He had lived through the trauma of losing his mother, the suffocating attention of the press, and the constant comparisons to his older brother. He had been defined as the spare, the secondary figure in a dynasty that prized the heir above all. Every slight, every headline, every whispered dismissal had burned itself into his memory. And now, with Archie and Lilibet, Harry was determined to rewrite that narrative. His resolve to secure their recognition was born not just from a father's love, but from a lifetime of scars that he refused to see repeated. Harry's determination did not emerge suddenly in that confrontation with his father. It had been building steadily for years, a fire that grew hotter with every perceived insult or rejection. Even before Megxit, Harry had hinted at his discontent with the system. He spoke openly about mental health, about feeling trapped, about questioning whether anyone truly wanted to live within the confines of monarchy. When Meghan entered his life, she gave his doubts form and voice. Together, they decided to step back, but Harry's decision to protect his children was not about leaving. It was about ensuring they were not erased. He understood how easily the monarchy could sideline those it deemed unnecessary, and he feared Archie and Lilibet would be the next casualties of that cold calculus. Harry's resolve was fueled by a profound sense of injustice. He believed that Archie and Lilibet, as the grandchildren of the king, deserved the same acknowledgement as other royal children. He bristled at the idea that their legitimacy could be questioned simply because he and Meghan had chosen a different path. To him, the denial of titles was not just an institutional decision. It was a personal insult, one that cut to the very core of his identity as a father. His children were innocent, yet they were paying the price for choices he had made. That reality gnawed at him, hardening his resolve into something immovable. Behind Harry's determination lay another layer, his mother's legacy. Diana had fought fiercely to protect her sons from the coldness of the palace. She insisted on taking them on public outings, exposing them to the realities of ordinary life, and shielding them from the worst of the press. She gave them a taste of freedom within a world that demanded servitude. Harry inherited that instinct from her. In every decision he made about Archie and Lilibet, Diana's memory loomed large. He saw himself as carrying her torch, as ensuring her grandchildren would never feel abandoned or devalued in the way she once felt. His fight for titles was, in many ways, a continuation of her fight for dignity. Harry's determination also had a defiant edge. He had grown tired of being told no, of being reminded that he was secondary, of being treated as though his voice carried less weight than others in the family. Each rejection from the palace only strengthened his will. He was no longer the boy who obeyed quietly. He was the man who spoke out, who gave interviews, who wrote a memoir that exposed the inner workings of the family. He had found power in defiance, and he would not relinquish it easily. In demanding titles for his children, Harry was not just making a request, he was issuing a challenge. He was daring the monarchy to deny him again, to confirm the very narrative he had been building about its coldness and rigidity. Yet Harry's determination was not fueled only by anger. It was also rooted in love. He adored his children, spoke of them often, and relished the role of fatherhood. Becoming a parent had reshaped his priorities. Where once he might have accepted slights as part of his own burden, now he saw them as intolerable when aimed at Archie and Lilibet. His love for them was protective, fierce, and unyielding. It was the kind of love that transforms into determination when challenged. He could endure personal rejection, but he would not stand by while his children were denied acknowledgement. That love gave his fight a moral clarity in his own mind, even if others saw it as selfishness or arrogance. His resolve was also tied to the modern world in which he lived. Harry had watched as the monarchy struggled to adapt to the demands of transparency, diversity, and modern values. He believed that by pushing for his children's recognition, he was forcing the institution to evolve. In his mind, Archie and Lilibet represented the future, biracial, global, modern, unbound by outdated rules. Denying them titles was not just an insult to his family, it was a step backward for the monarchy. Harry framed his determination not only as a personal crusade, but as a larger battle for progress. He believed history would judge him kindly for fighting this fight, even if the present did not. Still, Harry's determination carried risks. His defiance alienated him further from his family. Each demand hardened Charles's stance, making reconciliation more difficult. Each public revelation he gave deepened the rift. His resolve to fight for Archie and Lilibet risked becoming a wedge that pushed him permanently outside the fold. Yet Harry seemed willing to accept that cost. To him, the price of silence was far greater. Better to be the outcast who fought for his children than the compliant son who watched them be diminished. His determination was as much about his own identity as it was about theirs. Observers could see that this was not a battle Harry would easily give up. Those close to him described his tone when speaking of Archie and Lilibet as firm, almost unshakable. He had made up his mind, and no amount of persuasion could sway him. To the palace, this intransigence was infuriating. To Harry, it was integrity. He believed that bending on this issue would mean betraying his children, betraying Diana's legacy, and betraying himself. That conviction gave him strength, but it also made compromise nearly impossible. Harry's determination, then, must be seen as both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. It gave him courage to stand up to an institution that had defined and confined him for his entire life. But it also blinded him to the nuances of the situation, to the reality that titles could not solve every problem. His love for his children was undeniable, but his fight for their recognition risked deepening the very divisions he sought to heal. And yet, in Harry's eyes, there was no alternative. He would not accept a future in which Archie and Lilibet were sidelined. He would push, he would demand, he would defy, because to him, anything less would be failure. This chapter reveals Harry as a man transformed by fatherhood, emboldened by love, and hardened by years of rejection. His determination was not reckless. It was the product of everything he had endured. But it was also a force that would bring him into direct collision with his father. Because Charles, too, was determined. Determined to preserve the monarchy, to uphold tradition, to ensure that the crown remained strong. The clash between these two men was inevitable, because their determinations pointed in opposite directions. One toward recognition, the other toward preservation. One toward change, the other toward tradition. And when those forces met, the result would be explosive. Harry's resolve to secure recognition for Archie and Lilibet cannot be separated from the story of his own identity. From his earliest years, his life had been defined by contrasts. He was both privileged and trapped, adored and criticized, protected and exposed. Every royal event, every public outing, every photo snapped of him as a child was a reminder that he lived under scrutiny he did not choose. Those experiences carved a perspective into him that was far different from his brothers. William, as heir, was molded to accept the burden of the crown. Harry, as the spare, was left in a strange limbo. Important enough to be watched, but never essential enough to be prioritized. This duality instilled in him a deep resentment of hierarchy, but also a fierce desire to matter. And now, with his children, he saw the chance to break that cycle, to fight for their legitimacy in a way no one had fought for him. In private conversations with friends, Harry often described the monarchy as an institution that cared more about optics than people. He had felt the sting of that truth in the aftermath of Diana's death, when protocol seemed to matter more than grieving children. He saw it again in the way Meghan was treated, with silence from the palace as the tabloids tore her apart. For him, the refusal to grant titles to Archie and Lilibet was not a practical decision. It was another sign that the family prioritized image over love. This belief fueled his determination. He had lived too long feeling like an afterthought to accept the same fate for his children. The issue of titles became, in Harry's mind, a symbolic battleground. He was not naive. He knew that a title would not shield Archie and Lilibet from all scrutiny. But he believed it would offer them a measure of protection. It would force the palace to acknowledge them, to include them in the family's official narrative. Without titles, he feared they would be cast aside, dismissed as irrelevant, their royal heritage erased. This fear was not abstract, it was rooted in his own life. He knew what it felt like to be overshadowed, to be seen as expendable, to be valued less. His determination to fight for Archie and Lilibet's titles was, at its core, a determination to ensure they would never feel the same way. Harry's memoir, his interviews, and his public appearances all carried echoes of this conviction. He spoke with emotion about his children, about his desire to protect them, about the lengths he would go to secure their future. He framed his struggle as both personal and universal. Yes, he was a prince, but he was also a father. And any father, he argued, would fight to give their children the best possible future. This framing was deliberate, designed to garner empathy, to make his fight relatable to those outside the palace. And for many, it worked. Supporters saw in Harry not just a royal rebel, but a devoted parent, someone willing to stand up against centuries of tradition for the sake of his children. But within the palace, his determination was seen very differently. To Charles and others, Harry's insistence on titles was evidence of entitlement. They believed he wanted to enjoy the privileges of royalty while rejecting its responsibilities. They saw his persistence not as protection for his children, but as an attempt to leverage his royal status for personal gain. This perception hardened Charles's stance. Every time Harry pushed, Charles pushed back harder, convinced that giving in would weaken the crown. What Harry viewed as love, Charles viewed as manipulation. What Harry saw as a moral obligation, Charles saw as a political risk. Harry's determination was also strengthened by Meghan's support. She had faced relentless attacks in the media and understood firsthand the power of perception. To her, denying Archie and Lilibet titles was more than just exclusion. It was a message to the world that her children were not equal, not fully accepted. Meghan's influence reinforced Harry's resolve. Together, they presented a united front, framing their fight as one against systemic unfairness. They believed they were not only standing up for their own children, but challenging an outdated system that resisted progress. This shared conviction gave Harry strength, but it also made compromise with the palace nearly impossible. The more the palace resisted, the more determined Harry became. It was as if every refusal confirmed his belief that the institution was rigid, cold, and incapable of change. Each rejection deepened his resolve, turning what might have been a negotiation into a crusade. He began to see himself not just as a father fighting for his children, but as a symbol of resistance against an institution unwilling to evolve. This self-image gave him confidence, but it also blinded him to the possibility that his determination could backfire, that by pushing too hard, he might widen the very divide he wanted to close. The emotional core of Harry's determination was his fear of invisibility. He had lived through the experience of being the second son, overshadowed by William, defined by contrast rather than by his own worth. He did not want Archie and Lilibet to live with that same shadow. To him, titles were visibility, proof that his children belonged, that they could not be ignored. Without them, he feared they would be erased from history, remembered only as footnotes in a family that never fully embraced them. This fear drove him relentlessly, shaping every conversation he had with his father, every word he spoke publicly, every choice he made privately. As his determination hardened, Harry also became more confrontational. No longer willing to remain silent, he brought his demands directly to the king. This was not the timid son of years past. This was a man who had found his voice and was unafraid to use it, even against the crown itself. The confrontation that followed was born of this resolve, a clash between a father's love and a king's duty, between personal conviction and institutional preservation. For Harry, it was the culmination of years of frustration, the moment when he would finally stand his ground. For Charles, it was a test of authority, the point at which he would draw a line that even his son could not cross. Harry's determination, then, is not just about titles. It is about identity, legacy, love, and rebellion. It is about a man who refuses to be silenced, who refuses to let his children suffer the same neglect he endured, who refuses to accept that tradition should outweigh humanity. But it is also about the risks of defiance, the costs of standing against an institution that has outlasted centuries. Harry's resolve makes him admirable to some and reckless to others. What cannot be denied is that it makes him unyielding. And when unyielding determination meets unyielding tradition, the result is inevitable conflict. This chapter closes with the image of Harry standing firm, his resolve unshaken, his love for his children burning brightly, his defiance sharpened by years of rejection. He is a man prepared to face the consequences of challenging his father, prepared to risk exile for the sake of recognition. His determination has set him on a collision course with the king, and the next chapter reveals what happens when father and son finally confront one another within the gilded halls of the palace, where love and duty clash with devastating force.